Hello, this is Ernesto Amaral from the Department of Sociology at Texas A&M University. In this lecture, we're going to talk about public and local green initiatives, which is based on Chapter 9 of the textbook by Michael and Weber. As I mentioned before, you should read the chapter in the textbook to be able to answer the quizzes because some specific examples available in the chapter I'm not going to cover here. At the same time, you should watch or read this lecture in order to do the other assignments for our social change course. So this chapter is organized on these main items here: public green initiatives, urban initiatives, circular economy, transition towns, the commons, rural initiatives, and agroecology. So on the public topic of public green initiatives, governments are invested in green infrastructure and to improve environmental resilience and urban livability. Policies support renewable energy, emissions reductions, and ecosystem restoration in response to climate change. Nations often aim to align climate goals with economic competitiveness and energy security. Public initiatives, they shape the broader political landscape for sustainability by setting regulatory frameworks. So the authors here are emphasizing all these different initiatives that the governments have been implemented in order to deal with climate change. And all that is related to all different aspects of social change that countries have been experiencing nowadays. Conventional development models, they often ignore local ecological limits and cultural knowledge. These local green initiatives, they respond to environmental degradation and institutional failures. They prioritize resilience, justice, and community-driven solutions. So that's the rationale behind these local green initiatives. And the main issue here is all the climate change issues that we have been experiencing, the global warming process. And as the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres mentioned in 2023, the era of global warming has ended. The era of global boiling has arrived. And as it is shown in the textbook on figure 9.1 on the global average temperature change, and this data here going from 1980 to over 2020, and this is showing the monthly average global surface temperature anomalies relative to a 1991-2020 baseline. And we see that in these more recent years, we have been seeing a positive monthly average global surface temperature. In other words, positive in the sense that temperatures have been increasing. We have an overall global average temperature changing. The world is getting warmer. So we see that all our actions related to development, they have been having a really strong effect on climate change and specifically on global warming. And this data here from this work of the climate crisis explained in 10 charts. So in this discussion, we have this redefining development locally topic that comes into discussion. Local efforts, they challenge dominant economic indicators, such as we have been mentioning, the gross domestic product as the main measure of development. They center well-being, cooperation, and ecological integrity. These start to be the main discussion aiming to change how our societies are organized. Development is reframed through community empowerment and sustainability. And related to that is democratic localism. Municipalism advocates for cities as drivers of progressive ecological change. It involves participatory budgeting, local governance, and climate planning. Democratic localism emphasizes direct systems control over public resources. So you start to have, again, all these bottom-up movements going up, trying to create a more democratic change through the problems that the world is going on right now. Whether this is going to have a lasting effect, that's open to question. Ecological repair and resilience. Local projects restore degraded landscapes through reforestation and soil renewal. They prioritize biodiversity, climate resilience, and human-nature connection. Community involvement fosters stewardship and sustainable livelihoods. And energy democracy is also related to this discussion. Energy democracy challenges centralized fossil fuel systems. Local energy cooperatives produce renewable energy and reinvest in communities. This promotes equity, accountability, and ecological integrity. And in terms of local climate adaptation, communities develop early warning systems, green infrastructure, and relocation plans. Local knowledge informs adaptation to droughts, floods, and sea level rise. Adaptation is most effective when it's participatory and inclusive. And again, whether those local level initiatives, they will have lasting impacts in all these issues that we have been experiencing, in all these things that are going on in the world. It's open to debate and it's open to discussion, but it's a way to think how social change can happen from now on, whether in a more participatory manner, more inclusive manner or not. And like I mentioned, this is scaling up from the local. Local initiatives can influence regional, national, and global policies. Networks, they share best practices and support replication. Scaling up respects diversity while amplifying the effects in the long term. So this is related to green pathways from below. Public and local green initiatives offer grounded alternatives to top-down models. So instead of having top-down models, you have bottom-up initiatives, which prioritize justice, care, and sustainability in everyday life. Local actions challenge dominant paradigms and shape the future of development. So we have the challenge of this local action, as I'm mentioning here. The structural barriers include funding gaps, legal constraints, and political pushback. Local solutions must be supported by systematic change, by really systematic social change. Otherwise, they will not have lasting effects. Despite limitations, local actions provide vital experimentation and hope. And that's the whole discussion that the textbook is having in these final chapters after all the discussion about the development project and the globalization project. On the next topic of this chapter, urban initiatives. Cities, they lead in innovation for sustainability through local policy experimentation and urban planning. Urban areas implement bike lanes, green buildings, and transit systems to reduce emissions and improve quality of life. So you start to have these local level experiments going on in different parts of the world. Municipalities form networks to share strategies and scale local environmental actions globally. Community engagement and inclusive planning are central to urban sustainability efforts. So you start to have these local initiatives. At the same time, these municipalities, they form some networks that might have some effects in a more global scale. For example, urban gardening and food justice. Urban agriculture addresses food insecurity and builds local capacity. It transforms vacant land into productive green community spaces. These projects promote food access, health, and community empowerment. And in terms of urban sustainability, sustainable transit systems, they reduce emissions and increase accessibility. Investment in public transit supports equity and climate goals. Cities are reimagining infrastructure to prioritize people over cars. So you have all these different initiatives at the local level trying to push back against the negative effects of the development and globalization projects. For example, cooperative models, worker cooperatives, and solidarity economies, they center local ownership. These models reinvest profits in communities and prioritize sustainability. They challenge extractive corporate practice and foster resilience. Solidarity economies, they center cooperation, mutual aid, and sustainability. Local exchange systems like time banking foster non-monetary value. They reduce dependency on global markets and build community ties. And in terms of community science, residents, they participate in data collection on air, water, and soil quality. Community science empowers action and holds polluters accountable, like related to environmental monitoring. Community science bridges local knowledge with formal research. And in terms of climate resilience hubs offer community support during environmental and social crises. They provide energy, food, and information access in emergencies related, for example, to climate change. These climate resilience hubs, they foster social cohesion and adaptive capacity. So all these issues that are going on in the world right now, in all different spheres, wars and conflicts, and rise of authoritarian regimes, these bottom-up initiatives, these community initiatives, are a sign that some other kind of social cohesion and social change is possible. And that's the debate that's being done throughout the textbook. In terms of disaster recovery, mutual aid networks respond quickly to environmental disruptions. They offer food, shelter, and solidarity without bureaucratic delay. Such networks are rooted in trust, reciprocity, and justice. And for example, local public banks finance sustainable infrastructure and community projects. Green finance supports renewable energy, housing retrofits, and resilience. So democratizing finance reorients capital towards collective goals. So public banking is a local initiative also try to strengthen community projects. Participatory mapping. Communities use digital mapping to track threats and assets. Technology supports transparency and spatial justice in planning. Geospatial tools visualize environmental injustice and mobilize change. So overall, there is this policy institutional support. Local initiatives thrive when supported by enabling national frameworks. So these local initiatives are important and they create networks among themselves, but they will actually have long-term effects if they have some support from national governments. Policies can provide funding, legal protection, and coordination platforms. So it has to have some sort of a more bigger support from regional or national governments. Multi-level governance strengthens sustainability outcomes. And then on the next topic of this chapter, circular economy. A circular economy minimizes waste by reusing, recycling, and repairing materials in production and consumption. It contrasts with linear models by promoting resource efficiency and closed-loop systems. Governments and businesses adopt circular economy frameworks to decouple growth from resource depletion. So they try to have some sort of growth, economic development, and so on, without having so much negative effects on nature. Policies encourage sustainable design, product longevity, and shared responsibility across supply chains. And you aim to have waste reduction. Local initiatives reduce waste through composting, recycling, and reuse. The circular economy values closed-loop production and material conservation. These practices, they challenge consumerism and build sustainability. And related to this circular economy is participatory planning. Participatory planning involves citizens in environmental decision-making. It promotes transparency, inclusion, and locally relevant solutions. Climate-justice frameworks address structural inequality in environmental policy. And on the next topic here on transition towns. Transition towns are community-led efforts to build resilience in response to peak oil, climate change, and economic instability. These movements focus on local food systems, renewable energy, and relocalized economies. Social capital, creativity, and collective action, they drive the reimagining of sustainable futures. Transition towns embody grassroots solutions that challenge centralized development paradigms. And we have related to that some post-carbon strategies. Local efforts focus on decarbonization through renewable energy and energy efficiency. Transition towns prepare for reduced fossil fuel reliance via relocalization. Strategies emphasize resilience, equity, and democratic participation. And eco-villages experiment with sustainable living models. They integrate ecological beauty, permaculture, and shared governance. Such intentional communities serve as innovation hubs for regenerative practice that tries to deal with the issues related to climate change and keep also promoting more equitable economic growth. So you have these localized transition pathways. Each community tailors its green transition to its unique history and needs. Instead of have top-down initiatives that standardize everything, each community have their own initiatives that takes into account their history, their context. So cultural context, ecological conditions, and governance shape these solutions, these bottom-up solutions. Diverse approaches enrich the global sustainability movement. And in terms of community energy transitions, residents co-own solar and wind projects that benefit the whole community, for example. These models build local wealth and energy sovereignty. They challenge extractive utility monopolies. And on the next topic here, the commons. The commons refers to collectively managed resources in terms of land, water, forests, and seeds. Community-based governance of commons emphasizes stewardship, equity, and sustainability. Reviving commons resists privatization and corporate control over essential ecological resources. So you try to have the community having control of these ecological resources. Commons-based initiatives, they foster autonomy and local knowledge and environmental management. Ecological citizenship involves daily practice that care for the commons. Local actions build civic culture and identity rooted in stewardship and justice. These practices shift values from consumption to connection among people and with the environment. And on the topic of legal rights for nature, some localities grant rivers, forests, or ecosystems legal personhood. These laws, they shift legal frameworks from ownership to guardianship, so we tend to protect more the natural resources. Rights of nature challenge extractivism, legal traditions, switching the logic of the globalization project that centers only on economic development and doesn't think about the effects on nature, on the natural resources. And the next topic of the chapter on rural initiatives. Rural communities develop sustainability projects rooted in local needs, cultures, and ecologies. These rural initiatives, they include reforestation, agroecology, decentralized energy systems, and water conservation. Rural greening reinforces food sovereignty and resilience against industrial agriculture and climate shocks. Again, bottom-up development aligns with traditional practice and community self-determination. So we don't throw away all the previous practices that we know, technological advancements and development, but link them into community self-determination, take into account the context in this bottom-up approach. Community forests. Local forest governance protects ecosystems and supports rural livelihoods. Community managed forests balance conservation and sustainable use. They offer alternatives to extractive logging and land grabs. Collaboration for sustainability. Rural-urban partnerships strengthen food system and resource cycles and create these partnerships between rural and urban areas. Cities depend on rural regions for water, food, and carbon sinks. Collaborations enable landscape scale environmental planning. And on the next topic here, agroecology. Agroecology integrates ecological science with traditional farming knowledge to create sustainable food systems. It supports biodiversity, soil health, and climate resilience without reliance on synthetic inputs. Agroecology empowers smallholders and promotes food sovereignty by resisting agribusiness models. So it's a small farms that are the center in this agroecology approach. As a holistic approach, it links environmental care, social justice, and economic viability in agriculture. In terms of food sovereignty and agroecology, food sovereignty prioritizes local control over food systems. Agroecology integrates ecological science with traditional farming practices. These approaches challenge industrial agriculture and protect biodiversity. So you do have development, but taking into account the limits of our natural resources, of the environment. Ecological literacy is an important point here. Environmental education fosters stewardship and systems thinking. Youth programs teach climate science, activism, and sustainability. Green learning connects schools with community projects and nature. So we see a lot of these initiatives at the municipal level in different parts of the world. And they, as we mentioned, start to create some networks that might go up into a more global initiative, but all these things are still up into develop in a more global scale or national scale. Local ecological economics. Ecological economics accounts for environmental limits and social equity. It values ecosystem services and unpaid labor in care and subsistence economies. Local green initiatives often embody these principles. And in terms of environmental justice, local green initiatives link environmental quality to human health, to public health. So relates the environment into public health. Air pollution, heat, and toxins disproportionately affect marginalized groups. Green space, clean water, and safe housing are health interventions. So you start to think about these different actions in terms of using our environmental resource in a more equitable way to promote public health. So this is all related to this environmental justice. Resilience through diversity. Diverse local systems are more resilient to ecological and economic shocks. Pluralism in practice, governance, and knowledge builds adaptability. Diversity is both a strength and a survival strategy. So in summary, what is discussed in this chapter, public and local green initiatives emerge as alternatives to top-down development. Whether these are going to actually scale up and go at the national level is what we have been experiencing right now. And it depends on the actions of different actors, everybody involved in our society. They focus on sustainability, justice, and local empowerment. Examples of these local green initiatives include energy democracy, food sovereignty, and urban farming. Local projects emphasize ecological care, equity, and resilience. These initiatives reshape development from the ground up. And here are some questions for reflections that could help you working on the assignments for this class. How do local green initiatives challenge dominant development models? In what ways do these projects integrate ecological and social justice? What role should governments play in supporting grassroots innovation? How can local initiatives scale their impact without losing autonomy? What can we learn for diverse local responses to global crises? So all these global crises going on right now, how these local responses can help deal with these issues. And here are some selected websites that are available at the end, are listed at the end of the chapter. The Declaration of the International Forum for Agroecology from Mali, 2015. This work by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, Circular Economy in Cities. The IASTD report from 2008, also related to these local agriculture initiatives. The Transition Network. The UN Habitats Global Activities Report from 2017. The UN Millennium Ecosystems Assessment. The UN Sustainable Development Goals that we already cited in previous chapters. Women Organizing for Change in Agriculture and Natural Resource Management. So some different websites to look for further information on this topic. So thank you very much. This was another lecture on our social change class, and thank you very much for your attention.